In 1920, a tiny Jewish farming community found itself in a war zone. The Ottoman Empire had just collapsed, and the French were trying to control the Upper Galilee. Local Arab militias were fighting to stop them. The hills became a no-man's land, and a handful of Jewish outposts were caught in the middle. Arab fighters regularly showed up, demanding to search for French soldiers, and they often left with stolen supplies. Until one morning, when more than 100 armed men surrounded the community of Tel Hai. They demanded entry, accusing the farmers of hiding French troops inside. The nervous Jewish residents opened their gates. By nightfall, 8 of them lost their lives, and the settlement was abandoned. What happened that day would become one of the most powerful legends in Zionist history, shaping how generations of Israelis understood sacrifice, courage, and the price of fighting for something greater than yourself. This is the story of Tel Hai. For centuries, this region had been ruled by the Ottoman Empire, but when the Ottomans lost World War I, the Middle East was suddenly up for grabs. Even before the Great War ended, Britain and France had secretly agreed to divide much of the Ottoman territory between themselves. At the same time, Britain had made separate promises to Arab and Jewish leaders that each could form independent states after the war. But all these promises didn't exactly line up. When Britain withdrew from the area of what would eventually become northern Israel and France claimed it as their own, local Arab nationalists were furious. They expected independence, not French rule. Armed militias began resisting the French presence. The region grew unstable, and a handful of tiny Jewish farming communities found themselves in the crossfire. One of these communities was Tel Hai. Now, Jewish leaders were also upset to find this region under French control. They believed the British were more sympathetic to the Zionist cause than the French, so the more land the French controlled, the less would be available for a future Jewish state. But these were small farming communities. Unlike their more powerful Arab neighbors, open revolt against the French was not an option. They decided their best hope for surviving the conflict was to stay neutral. But even so, local Arabs suspected them of collaborating with the French, and life in Tel Hai grew more dangerous by the week. Tel Hai wasn't a sprawling village. It was a small, fortified farm designed to survive in a rough neighborhood. A cluster of stone buildings formed a protective barrier around a single, enclosed courtyard. Zionist leaders debated what to do about these exposed northern communities. Should they evacuate them or try to stick it out? Some argued they were absolutely indefensible, isolated and outnumbered. Why risk lives and waste resources trying to hold small outposts in a region that would likely fall to the French anyway? But others saw it differently. If they wanted a homeland where they wouldn't be dependent on a ruling empire, they needed land. Without these footholds, there was no chance that any of the Upper Galilee would be included in a future Jewish state. And in 1920, no one knew how the borders were going to be drawn. Every community abandoned could mean land lost forever. So instead of evacuating the north, Zionist leaders sent reinforcements. They needed someone who knew how to fight, so they sent Yosef Trumpeldor. Trumpeldor was already something of a legend. He was a Russian Jew who lost his left arm fighting in the Russo-Japanese War. During World War I, he helped organize a Jewish military unit to support the British. He was disciplined, tough, and uncompromising. And now, in the winter of 1919, he arrived in the Upper Galilee to organize the defense of Tel Hai and the other northern outposts. When the residents of Tel Hai saw Trumpeldor riding into town, it must have felt like the cavalry had arrived. He trained the defenders, strengthened their positions, coordinated between the 4 northern communities. Among those who joined him was Devorah Drechler, one of the few women who took part in armed defense, because she refused to take no for an answer. But even with Trumpeldor's reinforcements, Tel Hai remained extremely vulnerable to raids. Armed groups of Arabs still appeared at the gate, demanding to search for French soldiers. Supplies were taken, weapons confiscated. In one especially degrading incident, Trumpeldor and several other defenders were robbed and stripped of their clothes as a public insult by an Arab militia. The message was clear. Even behind stone walls and a heavy gate, Trumpeldor and the rest of the Jews survived only at the mercy of their Arab neighbors. And then, on March 1st, 1920, over 100 armed men, led by a local Bedouin commander, gathered outside the gate of Tel Hai. They demanded to search the place for French soldiers. The residents of Tel Hai were used to these kind of searches, but not like this. Not over 100 men. This felt different. Trumpeldor tried to negotiate with the crowd and ultimately agreed to let a small search party enter the compound. There were no French soldiers to be found, but things were extremely tense. Everyone was armed. People were jittery. Then, a shot. No one knows who fired the first shot. Some accuse the Arab searchers of opening fire. Some say things escalated when a member of the search party tried to confiscate Devorah Drechler's weapon. Others think the first shot may have just been a misunderstanding, a tragic mistake. Either way, the spark was lit. Within seconds, the courtyard erupted in shots. Bullets ricocheted off stone. The firefight lasted for hours. Trumpeldor was shot twice, once in the arm, the other tore into his abdomen. Mortally wounded, he continued issuing orders to the defenders for hours. That evening, the surviving defenders evacuated the wounded and the bodies to a nearby outpost. Trumpeldor didn't survive the night. 8 of Tel Hai's defenders were no longer alive, 6 men and 2 women, including Devorah Drechler. 5 of the Arabs lost their lives as well. The next day, the compound was set on fire and destroyed. In the days after the battle, a story began to circulate. According to the doctor who treated him, as Yosef Trumpeldor lay dying, he said, "It is good to die for our country." The line spread like wildfire. For a young Zionist movement struggling to build a future state, the words were powerful. They transformed a tragic firefight into something much larger, a story of sacrifice and resolve, and they turned Trumpeldor into a martyr. Some historians question whether Trumpeldor actually said those words, or if it was just a pleasant fiction created by the doctor to honor Trumpeldor's memory. We'll never know for sure, but we do know that early Zionism was trying to create a new kind of Jewish identity, one rooted not in exile or helplessness, but in self-defense and sovereignty. When the State of Israel was finally established, a new town was founded near Tel Hai called Kiryat Shmona, which means the Town of the Eight, to honor the 8 defenders who fell at Tel Hai. Today, the original courtyard has been preserved as a historic site, supported by Jewish National Fund USA and its donors across the United States. Tel Hai was a small battle in a chaotic border war. Militarily, it changed almost nothing. But the events of that one chaotic day in 1920 helped inspire a core tenet of Israeli national identity. The Jewish survival could never again depend on the power of others. The Jewish nation must be able to defend itself.